Lewd dripped from Elsa's torn sleeve onto the weathered floorboards of Mara Colton's workshop, each crimson drop catching the firelight like scattered rubies. The 14-year-old girl clutched something against her chest, her knuckles white with determination, despite the pain etched across her gaunt features. "Please," Elsa whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling Nevada wind that rattled the workshop's thin walls. "They're coming. We need—" The object tumbled from her weakening grasp, striking the floor with a metallic chime that seemed to echo far longer than it should. Mara Colton, 42 years of wind-carved resilience and calloused hands, dropped her hammer and rushed to the girl's side. But her eyes fixed on what had fallen, a gold locket, its surface engraved with ornate letters that spelled El Veyron. Behind Elsa, 3 smaller children huddled in the doorway, like frightened sparrows. Twins Finn and Faye, 10 years old with matching copper hair, flanked little 6-year-old Wren, whose persistent cough had worsened during their desperate flight across the frozen Badlands. "Who's after you?" Mara demanded, her rifle already in hand, though she couldn't remember reaching for it. Instinct carved by years of frontier survival. Elsa's gray eyes held secrets too heavy for her young shoulders. Gideon Holt. The name hit Mara like a physical blow. Every soul in the Nevada territory knew that name, whispered in saloons, cursed by miners, feared by anyone who valued their life. Gideon Holt commanded the most ruthless syndicate west of the Mississippi, a network of killers and thieves who answered to no law save his own brutal justice. Why would Holt want? Mara began, then stopped as her gaze fell again on the locket. El Veyron. Lillian Veyron, the name that had haunted wanted posters for 3 years. A woman who'd vanished with enough gold to buy a small army, leaving behind only rumors and a trail of bodies. "She was our mother," Elsa said simply, as if reading Mara's thoughts. "And now we're all that's left." Thunder rumbled overhead, but Mara knew it wasn't a storm approaching. Hoofbeats, many of them growing louder with each passing second. She scooped up the locket, its weight surprising for such a small thing, and herded the children toward the workshop's back room. "Stay quiet," she commanded, checking her rifle's chamber. 6 bullets. Against Holt's men, it might as well be 6 raindrops against a wildfire. The workshop door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by the brutal kick of a steel-toed boot. Through the splintered doorway stepped a figure that made the very air seem colder. Gideon Holt stood well over 6 feet, his black coat billowing like a raven's wings. A silver-handled revolver hung at his hip, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the workshop's flames. But it was his eyes that truly unnerved, pale blue like winter ice, holding no warmth, no mercy. Mara Colton. Holt's voice carried the dangerous smoothness of a rattlesnake's warning. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. I don't know what you're talking about." Mara replied, grateful her voice didn't betray the terror clawing at her chest. Holt's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile on a human face. On his, it looked predatory. 4 children, young ones. They carry just sentimental items that I'm eager to reclaim. Behind him, 6 armed men filled the workshop like shadows given form. Mara recognized the type killers who'd long since forgotten the difference between right and wrong, if they'd ever known it at all. "Haven't seen any children," Mara lied. Holt's pale eyes swept the workshop, taking in every detail with the methodical precision of a predator cataloging its territory. His gaze lingered on the blood droplets leading toward the back room. "Mrs. Colton," he said, his tone conversational despite the underlying menace. "I'm a reasonable man. Those children possess something that could cause complications for certain business interests. Return them to me, and I'll ensure your workshop remains standing when the sun rises tomorrow." The locket seemed to burn against Mara's palm where she'd hidden it behind her back. "And if I refuse—" Holt's expression didn't change, but somehow became infinitely more terrifying. Then you'll join the long list of people who thought they could deny Gideon Holt what he desires. One of his men stepped forward, a rope coiled in his hands. Not just any rope, a hangman's noose, the knot tied with practiced expertise. He began carving something into the workshop's main support beam with a long knife, each stroke deliberate and deep. 24 hours, Holt announced, turning toward the ruined door. Deliver the children, or I'll return to collect them myself. And Mrs. Colton? When I come back, I won't be nearly so patient. The men filed out as silently as they'd entered, leaving behind only the acrid smell of gunpowder and violence. Mara waited until the hoofbeats faded completely before examining what they'd carved into her beam, choke or deliver. When she finally allowed the children to emerge from hiding, Elsa's face had gone ashen. "He'll never stop," she whispered. "Not until we're dead and buried." "Maybe," Mara admitted, studying the locket in the firelight. Its surface was warm, as if it held some internal heat source. "But I've got friends in this territory, people who owe me favors." She began gathering supplies with the efficient movements of someone who'd fled danger before. Ammunition, jerky blankets, a water skin. The bare necessities for survival in Nevada's unforgiving wilderness. "Where are we going?" Finn asked, his young voice cracking with exhaustion. "Esperanza," Mara replied. "It's a settlement 3 days north. Mixed community, Ute, Navajo, Mexican, Chinese, some white folk who don't ask too many questions. If we can reach it." "If," Elsa repeated grimly. Mara shouldered her pack and checked her rifle one final time. Sometimes "if" is all you get. They slipped out through the workshop's rear window as snow began to fall, each flake catching the distant moonlight, like fragments of shattered stars. Behind them, the workshop stood dark and empty, a monument to the life Mara was abandoning, to save 4 children she barely knew. The locket bounced against her chest as they hurried through the night, its presence a constant reminder of the secrets it contained, secrets that men like Gideon Holt would kill for without hesitation. But as they disappeared into the endless expanse of Nevada wilderness, Mara Colton couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just running from Holt's men. They were running toward something far more dangerous than any outlaw syndicate. The truth. The rocky terrain north of Mara's workshop stretched like a moonscape of jutting stone and treacherous ravines. Snow fell harder now, each flake stinging exposed skin and reducing visibility to mere yards. Mara led the children along a narrow game trail that snaked between towering boulders, her boots finding purchase on rocks made slick by ice. "How much farther?" Wren's small voice carried a wet rattle that made Mara's chest tighten with concern. "Us not much farther to shelter," Mara replied, though privately she worried about the little girl's worsening cough. Lung fever in this cold could kill faster than Holt's bullets. Elsa walked beside her, the older girl's face set in lines of determination that belonged on someone twice her age. "Tell me about Esperanza," she said. "What makes you think we'll be safe there?" Mara paused to help Finn navigate a particularly treacherous section of loose shale. "It's built in a box canyon, only one way in or out. The people there, they've all got reasons to distrust outsiders asking questions. United States government drove them from their ancestral lands. Mining companies poisoned their watermen, like Holt burned their homes. They protect their own, and they'll consider us their own." Elsa's skepticism was evident. "They will if Tsela vouches for us." "Who's Tsela?" Mara's expression grew distant. "A man who knows what it means to lose everything. A Navajo scout who helped me once when I needed it most. If anyone can keep Holt's men from reaching Esperanza, it's him." They reached a sheltered overhang, just as the snow intensified into a full blizzard. Mara quickly built a small fire from dried wood she'd cached during previous journeys, the flames casting dancing shadows on the rock walls. The children huddled close to the warmth, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and fear. "I'm hungry," Faye whispered, her twin brother nodding agreement. Mara distributed strips of jerky and hardtack, watching the children eat with the desperate efficiency of those who'd known real hunger. "When did you last have a proper meal?" "3 days ago," Elsa replied. "Maybe 4. Time sort of blurs when you're running." "How long have you been running?" Elsa's hands found the locket chain around her neck, fingers worrying at the metal links. "Since Mother disappeared. That was 8 months ago. Maybe 9. Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the Nevada winter. 8 months, you children have been surviving alone for 8 months. Elsa takes care of us," Finn said loyally. "She's really smart. She figured out how to trade Mother's jewelry for food and how to avoid the sheriff's men, and the sheriff's men were after you too." Elsa's jaw tightened. "Everyone's after us. Sheriff Carson claims Mother stole money from the town fund. The mining company says she destroyed their equipment. And Holt..." She shuddered. "Holt says we belong to him now." The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling up toward the stone ceiling. Mara studied the locket resting against Elsa's chest, its gold surface reflecting the flames. Whatever secrets Lillian Veyron had hidden inside that innocent-looking piece of jewelry, they were worth enough to turn 4 children into the most hunted fugitives in the Nevada territory. "Get some sleep," Mara said finally. "We'll reach Esperanza tomorrow night if we push hard." But sleep came fitfully interrupted by Wren's coughing and the constant whistle of wind through stone crevices. Mara found herself staring at the dying embers, wondering what kind of woman abandons her children to face such danger alone. What could be so important that Lillian Veyron would choose disappearance over protection? The answer she suspected lay locked inside the golden pendant that had already cost so much blood. Dawn broke gray and bitter with fresh snow covering their tracks from the night before. Mara took this as a good sign. If they couldn't see their own trail, neither could Holt's men. She roused the children and shared the last of her coffee, the bitter warmth helping to fight off the numbing cold. "The trail gets more dangerous from here," she warned as they prepared to move. "We'll be crossing Devil's Canyon, and one wrong step means a 100-foot drop onto sharp rocks." "Sounds lovely," Elsa muttered, but Mara caught the hint of dark humor in her voice. This girl had steel in her backbone, forged by months of desperate survival. They made good time across the high country, the snow crunching beneath their boots, as they followed game trails that wound between towering pine trees. But as they approached the rim of Devil's Canyon, Mara's unease began to grow. Something felt wrong about the morning, too quiet, too still. The realization hit her just as they reached the canyon's edge. No bird songs, no small animal sounds. In the wilderness, silence meant only one thing: predators. "Get down!" Mara hissed, pushing the children behind a fallen log just as the first gunshot echoed across the canyon. The bullet splintered bark inches from Wren's head, sending wooden shrapnel flying. More shots followed, the reports echoing off canyon walls like thunder. Mara counted at least 4 different rifles based on the sound Holt's men had found them. "How?" Elsa gasped, pressing herself flat against the frozen ground. Mara's mind raced as bullets whined overhead. The tracks should have been covered by snow. Unless someone told them which direction we'd go. A new volley of gunfire forced them to crawl deeper behind the log. Mara could see muzzle flashes from the ridge across the canyon at least a quarter mile away. But with good rifles, that distance meant nothing. "The bridge," she said, pointing to a narrow stone arch that spanned the canyon's narrowest point. "If we can reach it." "That's a death trap," Elsa protested. "They'll pick us off before we're halfway across." "Maybe, but staying here is certain death." Another bullet slammed into the log, and this one close enough that Mara felt splinters sting her cheek. The shooters were adjusting their aim, finding the range. Soon, their cover would become their grave. "I'll go first," Mara decided. "Draw their fire. When they're focused on me, you take the children and run for the bridge. No. Elsa's voice carried absolute conviction. We go together or we don't go at all. Before Mara could argue, a new sound joined the chorus of gunshots, a war cry that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. From the canyon's eastern rim, a figure on horseback appeared as if materialized from the morning mist. Tsela. The Navajo scout rode his horse along the canyon rim with impossible grace, his rifle spitting fire as he engaged Holt's men from an entirely different angle. His appearance transformed the ambush into a three-way battle confusion, erupting among the attackers, as they found themselves caught between multiple threats. Now, Mara shouted. They sprinted for the stone bridge boots, slipping on ice-covered rock as bullets sang past their heads. Finn stumbled, and Faye grabbed his arm, hauling him upright without breaking stride. Wren's cough turned into gasping sobs, but she kept running, her small legs pumping with desperate determination. The bridge loomed ahead, a natural stone arch worn smooth by countless years of wind and weather. It stretched 60 feet across the canyon's narrowest point, but it was barely 3 feet wide with no railings or safety barriers. One misstep meant certain death on the jagged rocks below. Mara reached the bridge first, testing the stone with her weight before waving the children forward. Single file, hold hands, don't look down. They moved across the bridge like a human chain, each step carefully placed despite the gunfire continuing behind them. Halfway across, Mara made the mistake of glancing back. 3 of Holt's men were already pursuing their boots, striking the stone with ominous echoes. But Tsela had reached the bridge's far end, his dark eyes meeting Mara's across the span. In his weathered face, she saw grim determination and something else, recognition. He remembered their shared history, the debt that bound them together. Hurry, he called in accented English. More coming from the North Trail. They reached the far side, just as the pursuing gunmen gained the bridge. Tsela's rifle barked once, and the lead pursuer pitched sideways into the canyon. His scream cut short by the unforgiving rocks below. The remaining 2 men retreated, unwilling to face the Navajo's legendary marksmanship on such treacherous ground. This way. Tsela set his horse dancing sideways as he gestured toward a hidden trail. Esperanza lies beyond the red rocks. As they followed him into the maze of stone formations that guarded the approach to the settlement, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were only beginning. Holt's men had found them once. They would find them again. But for now, they were alive. In the Nevada territory, sometimes that was the most you could ask for. The hidden trail to Esperanza wound through a landscape that seemed carved from red dreams and golden nightmares. Towering sandstone spires thrust toward the sky, like ancient fingers, their surfaces etched with petroglyphs left by the Anasazi centuries before white men ever set foot in Nevada. Tsela led them through this maze with the confidence of someone who'd walked these paths since childhood. His horse's hooves finding secure footing on stone that looked treacherous to Mara's untrained eye. How did you know to find us? Mara asked as they paused to rest in the shadow of a massive natural arch. Tsela's dark eyes held depths of old pain. Word travels fast in the territory. Gideon Holt puts bounties on children people notice. People talk. He studied Elsa with particular attention, taking in her determined expression and protective stance over the younger children. You carry something he wants very badly. Elsa's hand moved instinctively to the locket. You know about this. I know about Lillian Veyron. I know about the night she disappeared and the blood she left behind. Tsela's voice carried the weight of personal loss. Your mother? She was not what she seemed. What do you mean? Elsa demanded. But Tsela had already urged his horse forward, ending the conversation. They continued through the red rock country as shadows lengthened and the temperature began to drop. Wren rode behind Mara, now the little girl's fever making her too weak to walk. Each of her labored breaths sent a spike of worry through Mara's chest. As the sun touched the western peaks, they crested a final ridge and saw Esperanza spread below them like a hidden jewel. The settlement nestled in a box canyon, whose walls rose sheer and unscalable on 3 sides, leaving only the narrow entrance they'd just used. Adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza, their flat roofs and thick walls speaking to architectural traditions that blended Mexican native and practical frontier influences. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Mara could see people moving between the buildings of the mixed community she'd described to Elsa, united by their shared experience of displacement and persecution. "It's beautiful," Faye whispered. "It's safe," Tsela corrected. Beauty and safety are not always the same thing. They descended into the canyon as darkness fell torches flaring to life throughout the settlement. People emerged from their homes to greet them, faces that reflected the multicultural nature of this remote sanctuary. Mara recognized several Samuel Chen, a Chinese immigrant who'd fled railroad violence. Maria Santos, a Mexican woman whose family had been driven from their ancestral ranch by Anglo settlers. Tom Standing Bear, a Ute warrior whose people had been decimated by the same forces that had scattered Tsela's Navajo clan. But it was the woman who stepped forward from the crowd that made Mara's breath catch. Dr. Elena Martinez, moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to command, her dark hair streaked with premature silver, and her intelligent eyes taking in the children with immediate medical assessment. "These children need food warmth and medical attention," she announced in crisp, educated English. "Questions can wait." Within minutes, they were ushered into a warm adobe house where a fire crackled in a traditional corner fireplace. Dr. Martinez examined Ren with gentle efficiency, while Maria Santos prepared a meal of beans tortillas and roasted meat that made all 4 children's eyes widen with desperate hunger. "Lung fever," Dr. Martinez diagnosed, quietly speaking to Mara while the children ate. "But not advanced. With rest and proper medicine, she'll recover." "Thank you," Mara breathed. "Don't thank me yet. Tsela tells me you're being hunted by Gideon Holt. That makes you everyone's problem." Outside, a community meeting was already forming in the plaza. Mara could hear voices raised in debate, some arguing for sheltering the children, others worried about bringing Holt's attention to Esperanza. It was Samuel Chen who finally asked the question that hung over everything. "What's in the locket that's worth this much blood?" All eyes turned to Elsa, who clutched the gold pendant protectively. "I don't know. Mother never told us. She said if anything ever happened to her, we should keep it safe and never let Holt have it." "Maybe it's time we found out," Dr. Martinez suggested gently. Elsa looked around the circle of faces, people who'd already risked their lives by taking them in, people who deserved to know what they were protecting. With trembling fingers, she worked at the locket's clasp until it finally opened with a soft click. Inside, nestled in purple velvet, lay a small brass key and a folded piece of paper no larger than a playing card. Tsela leaned forward as Elsa unfolded the paper, revealing not words, but a hand-drawn map marked with cryptic symbols. "It's a mine," Samuel Chen said immediately, his years in the gold fields evident in his quick recognition of the surveyor's marks. "But not just any mine. Look at these depth indicators. This is showing something deep underground." "The Belmont Mine," Dr. Martinez whispered, her face going pale. "Dear God, it's the Belmont Mine." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Even the children had heard whispers of Belmont, the mine where a gas explosion had killed 37 workers 2 years ago, including women and children from the nearby Ute settlement who'd been sheltering in the tunnels during a blizzard. That was no accident. Tom Standing Bear said, his voice heavy with old grief. "My sister was in those tunnels. My nephew. The mine owners, they sealed the entrances while people were still alive inside. To hide what they'd found," Tsela added grimly. "Silver ore so rich it would make men kill for it. And something else. Something the government wanted hidden." Mara felt pieces clicking together in her mind. Lillian Veyron worked at the Belmont mine. She was the bookkeeper, wasn't she? Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. She kept the records. The real records, not the ones filed with the territorial authorities. She knew exactly who gave the order to seal those tunnels, and she had proof. Proof that Gideon Holt was behind the massacre. Elsa breathed. That's why he wants us dead. Not for money or territory, but to bury the truth. The fire crackled in the silence that followed its flames, casting shifting shadows on faces that had suddenly become very serious indeed. Outside, the wind moaned through the canyon walls like the voices of the dead, reminding them all that some secrets carried a price too high for the living to pay. But as Mara looked around the circle of determined faces, she realized something had changed. They weren't just protecting 4 orphaned children anymore. They were protecting justice itself, holding in their hands the key to exposing one of the territory's greatest crimes. The question now was whether they would live long enough to use it. The revelation about the Belmont mine transformed the mood in Esperanza from cautious concern to grim determination. Tom Standing Bear spoke for many when he declared, "My people's blood cries out from that sealed mine. If this locket holds proof of who murdered them, then we have a duty to the dead." But Samuel Chen, ever practical, raised the obvious concern. "Holt commands a small army. We're maybe 40 adults in this canyon, half of them farmers and craftsmen. How do we stand against that kind of force?" "We don't stand against it," Tsela replied. "We make ourselves too costly to attack. Holt is a businessman first, killer second. If taking Esperanza costs him more than the locket is worth, he'll find another way," Dr. Martinez finished. "Men like Holt always find another way." Mara studied the map again, noting details she'd missed in the first shock of recognition. The key's purpose became clearer as she traced the tunnel systems. It opened a safety deposit box in Carson City, where Lillian had likely hidden the actual documents that would damn Holt. "We need to reach Carson City," she announced. "Whatever proof exists, it's locked away there. The locket just points the way." "Carson City is 200 miles, Maria Santos protested. "Through territory crawling with Holt's men." "Then we don't all go," Elsa said quietly. All eyes turned to the 14-year-old, who met their gazes with startling maturity. "The key is what matters now. The children, my siblings, they're just targets. But if someone could reach Carson City with this key..." "No." Mara's voice brooked no argument. "I'm not abandoning you to save documents. You wouldn't be abandoning us. You'd be ensuring our mother's death meant something." The debate continued deep into the night, but it was interrupted by Tom Standing Bear, who'd been keeping watch at the canyon entrance. He returned with news that chilled everyone present. "Riders coming. Maybe 20 moving careful-like through the red rocks. They'll be here by dawn." The peaceful settlement exploded into activity. Children were moved to the most defensible buildings. Weapons were distributed to anyone capable of using them. Barricades were erected at the canyon's narrow mouth, taking advantage of terrain that funneled attackers into a killing ground. Dr. Martinez established a medical station in the old church, its thick adobe walls offering the best protection. She moved Ren there first, the little girl's fever having broken, but her strength still fragile. "I'm staying to fight," Elsa declared, as Mara tried to convince her to shelter with the other children. "You're 14 years old. I'm 14, and I've been keeping my family alive for 8 months. I know how to use a rifle." Mara studied the girl's determined face and saw herself at that age forced to grow up too fast by circumstances beyond her control. "Stay close to me then, and if I tell you to run, you run." As dawn approached, they took their positions among the rocks and buildings that guarded Esperanza's entrance. The narrow passage between towering stone walls created a natural choke point, but it also meant they had nowhere to retreat if the defenses failed. Holt's men appeared with the sunrise, their black silhouettes stark against the red rock walls. They moved with military precision, spreading out to cover every possible angle of approach. But it was the figure at their head that made Mara's blood run cold. Gideon Holt himself had come to claim his prize. The outlaw leader rode to within rifle range and stopped, his pale eyes surveying the hastily erected barricades with what might have been amusement. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the distance, its civilized tone somehow more menacing than any shout. "People of Esperanza, I come seeking only what belongs to me. Return the 4 children and the item they carry, and you'll find me a reasonable neighbor." Tom Standing Bear's response echoed off the canyon walls. "These children are under our protection. Leave now, and you'll find us equally reasonable." Holt's smile was visible even at distance. "I admire loyalty, Mr. Standing Bear. It's a quality sadly lacking in our modern world. But loyalty has its limits, and I'm afraid you've exceeded yours." The attack began without further warning. Holt's men had brought more than rifles, they had dynamite, and they used it to devastating effect. The first explosion brought down part of the canyon wall, sending boulders crashing into the settlement's outer buildings. The second targeted the water supply, filling the air with choking dust and bitter smoke. Esperanza's defenders fought back with the desperate courage of people protecting their homes. Tsela's marksmanship proved legendary, his rifle dropping attackers with mechanical precision. Samuel Chen had rigged surprising traps in the narrow passages, collapsed stonework that caught unwary attackers in deadly deadfalls. But Holt's forces kept coming, wave after wave of hardened killers who'd learned warfare in conflicts across the American frontier. They pushed steadily forward, using explosives to clear obstacles and concentrated firepower to suppress resistance. During a brief lull in the fighting, Mara found herself crouched behind overturned furniture with Elsa reloading rifles, with hands that shook from more than just the ongoing explosions. "We can't hold them," Elsa said with brutal honesty. "We don't have to hold them forever, just long enough." "Long enough for what?" Mara's smile held no humor. "For me to remember something important about Gideon Holt's past." The memories had been surfacing all morning, triggered by proximity to the man who'd haunted the territory for so long. Now, as she watched him directing his forces with cold precision, details that had nagged at her consciousness finally crystallized into horrifying clarity. She'd seen those pale blue eyes before. Not in person, but in a photograph carried by a desperate woman who'd begged for help finding her missing children. A woman named Lillian Veyron, whose husband had supposedly died in a mining accident 3 years ago, except the husband hadn't died. He'd transformed himself into something far more dangerous than death, Gideon Holt, the most feared outlaw in Nevada territory. Lillian hadn't stolen from him, she'd stolen from her own husband, taking their children and running when she finally understood what kind of monster she'd married. The implications hit Mara like a physical blow. Elsa Finn Fay and little Wren weren't just random victims in Holt's pursuit of stolen goods. They were his own children, and he was willing to kill anyone who stood between him and their recovery. Not from paternal love, but because they represented witnesses to his greatest secret. Gideon Holt and the legendary outlaw was a fiction built on the graves of his own family's trust. As another explosion rocked the settlement, Mara made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her days. She had to get the children away from Esperanza before Holt's final assault began. Because when it came, he wouldn't stop until every defender was dead, and his secret was buried with them. The battle for Esperanza was about to become something far more personal than anyone imagined. The revelations about Holt's true identity added a nightmarish dimension to the siege. As Mara shared her discovery with Tsela during a desperate moment between attacks, the Navajo scout's weathered face grew even grimmer. "That explains much," he said, checking his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "The way he speaks to them like he owns them. Not like a criminal pursuing witnesses, but like a father claiming property." "We have to get them out of here," Mara insisted. before he breaks through the defenses. Where can they run that he won't follow? He commands too many men, knows this territory too well. The answer came from an unexpected source. Samuel Chen, blood trickling from a scalp wound, but his eyes bright with desperate inspiration, crawled to their position behind the overturned wagon. The Anasazi ruins, he gasped. 2 miles northeast, built into the canyon walls. If we can reach them before Holt realizes where we've gone. Those ruins have been abandoned for centuries, Mara protested. No food, no water, no shelter from the elements. But they have something better. Samuel's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Hidden passages. Secret chambers. The Anasazi built them to withstand siege warfare. If Holt wants those children, he'll have to come and take them from the ghosts of the ancient ones. Another explosion shook the settlement closer this time. Through the drifting smoke, Mara could see Holt's men advancing methodically using dynamite to clear defensive positions room by room. The defenders were running out of ammunition, out of space, and out of time. Well, Dr. Martinez won't abandon her patients, Tsela pointed out. Then she dies with them. Samuel replied with brutal pragmatism. But the children might live. The decision tormented Mara, but she knew he was right. They gathered Elsa Fin Fei and still-weak Ren in the church, where Dr. Martinez was tending wounded defenders with supplies that grew scarcer by the hour. I'm not leaving, the doctor declared when Mara explained the plan. These people trusted me to care for them, and I'm trusting you to help save 4 innocent children. Mara shot back. Elena, please. They need someone with medical training if they're going to survive in the ruins. Tom Standing Bear appeared in the church doorway, his rifle smoking from recent use. They've breached the outer barricades. Maybe 10 minutes before they reach the plaza. Dr. Martinez looked around at her patients, men and women who'd taken bullets defending children. They barely knew who'd risked everything for the sake of justice. Maria can handle the medical supplies, she said finally. I'll come with you. They slipped out through the church's rear entrance as explosions continued to rock the settlement's front lines. Samuel led them along a hidden path that wound up the canyon's eastern wall, invisible from below unless you knew exactly where to look. The ancient trail had been carved by hands that understood the value of concealment steps, cut so precisely they seemed part of the natural rock. Behind them, Esperanza burned. The smoke rose like a funeral pyre against the morning sky, and Mara forced herself not to think about the friends she was leaving behind. Tsela had volunteered to cover their retreat, his legendary marksmanship buying precious minutes while they climbed toward the ruins. But as they reached the trail's midpoint, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Well, well, a familiar voice called from above. Samuel Chen, leading sheep to slaughter. Their guide stopped so suddenly that Fei bumped into his back. When he turned around, shame and resignation warred across his weathered features. I'm sorry, he whispered. My family. He has my family in Carson City. Wife, 2 sons. He said if I helped him find the children. Holt's men emerged from concealment among the rocks above rifles trained on the group with professional precision. 6 armed killers led by Holt himself, who descended the trail with the casual confidence of someone who'd planned this moment perfectly. Samuel's been my eyes and ears in Esperanza for months. Holt explained conversationally as his men herded their captives against the canyon wall. Every arrival, every departure, every secret whispered around the fire. He's been quite helpful. You bastard, Dr. Martinez snarled. These are children. These are my children. Holt corrected his pale eyes, finding each young face in turn. And they're coming home with their father. Elsa stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance. You're not our father. Our father is dead. Holt's smile grew wider, more terrible. Yes, dear Elsa. Your father died in the Belmont mine, just like the records show. But from his grave rose something far more useful: Gideon Holt, who could do things that respectable mining executives never could. The truth hit like a physical blow. Lillian Veyron hadn't just stolen from her husband, she'd discovered his greatest secret. The mine accident that had killed 37 people, including Tom Standing Bear's family, hadn't been ordered by some distant corporate executive. It had been planned by their own father, covering up evidence of his illegal operations by murdering anyone who might expose them. Mother knew. Elsa breathed. She found out what you'd done, and she tried to save us. Your mother was weak, Holt replied coldly. Sentiment made her careless. She thought she could expose my business and somehow protect you from the consequences. Instead, she's made you all liabilities that must be managed. As his men forced them higher up the trail toward the ruins, Mara caught sight of movement in the rocks below. Tsela following their path with the silent grace that made him legendary among trackers. Behind him came Tom Standing Bear and several other defenders who'd survived the assault on Esperanza. But they were still outnumbered, and Holt's position on the high ground gave him every advantage. Mara realized with growing horror that their flight to the ruins might have merely delayed the inevitable massacre, unless the Anasazi had left more than just empty chambers in their ancient refuge, unless the ghosts of the past could somehow arm the living for one final stand against the darkness that had consumed too many innocents already. The ruins rose from the canyon wall like a stone prayer to forgotten gods. Multi-story buildings carved directly into the red sandstone, their empty windows staring out over the valley like hollow eyes. Ladders and stairs cut into the living rock, connected different levels, creating a vertical city that had housed hundreds of people during the height of Anasazi civilization. Now it would serve as the arena for a battle between past sins and present justice. Holt's men forced their captives into the ruin's central plaza, a courtyard surrounded by towering walls that had once echoed with the voices of children and the daily business of ancient life. Now it felt like a natural amphitheater designed for violence, its acoustics amplifying every footstep and whispered word. Magnificent, isn't it? Holt observed his cultured voice carrying easily in the confined space. These people understood the value of defensive positioning. Almost impossible to assault with multiple escape routes and natural advantages that would make any military engineer weep with envy. He gestured to his men, who immediately began positioning themselves at key vantage points throughout the ruins. They moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who'd fought in complex terrain before sealing off potential escape routes and establishing overlapping fields of fire. Of course, Holt continued, even the best defensive position becomes a trap if you can't leave. And I'm afraid none of you will be leaving these ruins alive. Dr. Martinez stepped protectively in front of the children. You can't mean to murder your own. I can't afford to let them live. Holt interrupted, his pale eyes devoid of any human warmth. They've seen too much, know too much. The business I've built requires absolute secrecy, and children have such inconvenient tendencies toward honesty. Elsa's voice cracked like a whip across the plaza. The locket contains more than just a map, doesn't it? Mother hid something else, something that proves what kind of monster you really are. Holt's composure slipped for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. The locket contains exactly what I expected it to contain. Your mother was clever, but not clever enough to outwit the man who taught her everything she knew about keeping secrets. But Mara had noticed something during their forced march to the ruins, the way Elsa's fingers worried at the locket's clasp and the small clicking sounds that suggested there might be more to the ornate piece than they'd initially discovered. A double compartment, perhaps, or a secondary mechanism that required specific manipulation to reveal its contents. As Holt's men completed their positions, the sound of gunfire echoed from below. Tsela and the other survivors had engaged the guards Holt had left at the trail's entrance, the sharp crack of rifles mixing with war cries that hadn't been heard in these canyons for decades. It seems your friends are persistent, Holt observed mildly. No matter. They'll find nothing but corpses when they finally fight their way up here. He drew his silver-handled revolver with a flourish, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon sun. Samuel, since you've served so faithfully, you may have the honor of dispatching Dr. Martinez. Consider it a reward for services rendered. Samuel Chen's face crumpled with anguish. Please, Mr. Holt. I've done everything you asked. Your family will join you shortly, I'm sure. But first, you'll demonstrate the same loyalty to me that these fools showed to strangers. The Chinese man's hands shook as he raised his rifle toward Dr. Martinez, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. But instead of firing at the doctor, Samuel suddenly spun and drove his rifle butt into the stomach of the nearest gunman. The man doubled over, gasping, and Samuel grabbed his pistol before anyone else could react. For my sons, he shouted and put a bullet through the heart of another of Holt's men before return fire cut him down. The plaza exploded into chaos. Mara tackled Elsa and the younger children, dragging them behind the low wall that surrounded an ancient fire pit. Bullets whined off stone walls, filling the air with chips of sandstone and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Dr. Martinez had rolled behind a different section of wall, her medical bag clutched protectively against her chest. But they were still trapped in the center of the plaza, with armed men on the surrounding levels raining death down on their positions. That's when Mara noticed something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Elsa had managed to work the locket fully open during the confusion, revealing not just the original map and key, but a second compartment containing a small brass cylinder. What is it? Mara gasped, pressing herself flat as another volley of shots chipped stone inches from her head. Elsa twisted the cylinder open with trembling fingers, revealing a tightly rolled photograph. But this wasn't just any picture. It showed Gideon Holt standing beside a group of uniformed men in front of the Belmont mine, all of them smiling, while bodies were loaded into a mass grave in the background. Government officials, Dr. Martinez breathed, having crawled close enough to see. Federal marshals by their badges, and that man in the expensive suit. Territorial Governor Richardson. Mara finished grimly. The man who signed the order to forcibly relocate the Ute people from their traditional lands. The same lands that just happened to sit on top of the richest silver deposit in Nevada. The photograph revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond one man's criminal empire. The massacre at Belmont Mine hadn't just been about covering up illegal operations, it had been about eliminating witnesses to a government-sanctioned genocide designed to clear valuable land for mining interests. Holt's voice cut through the gunfire, his earlier composure completely abandoned. Where is it? Where is the photograph? He'd obviously seen Elsa manipulating the locket, had realized that his worst fears were confirmed. The evidence that could destroy not just his criminal organization, but expose corruption at the highest levels of territorial government, was now in the hands of his enemies. Kill them, he screamed at his remaining men. Kill them all, but bring me that locket. The attack intensified, concentrated fire turning their stone shelter into a slowly disintegrating fortress. But just as their situation seemed hopeless, new sounds joined the battle Navajo war cries, echoing off ancient walls, the sharp crack of precision rifle fire from unexpected angles. Tsela had reached the ruins, and he hadn't come alone. Tom Standing Bear led a group of Ute warriors up through passages that only native knowledge could navigate, paths carved by the Anasazi and remembered through generations of tribal oral history. The battle became a three-dimensional chess match, fought in stone corridors and carved chambers. Holt's men found themselves outflanked by enemies who seemed to materialize from the very walls, who used architectural features that had been designed for exactly this kind of defensive warfare. But even with reinforcements, the outcome remained in doubt. Holt still commanded superior firepower and strategic position, and he fought with the desperate fury of a man who knew that exposure meant not just death, but the complete destruction of everything he'd built. As the sun began to set over the ancient ruins painting the sandstone walls, the color of dried blood, Mara realized that this battle would determine more than just the fate of 4 orphaned children. It would decide whether the truth about the Belmont Mine massacre would finally see the light of day or remain buried forever beneath the accumulated lies of powerful men. The photograph in Elsa's trembling hands represented justice for 37 innocents, including Tom Standing Bear's family, and countless others whose deaths had been dismissed as mining accidents or natural disasters. But first, they had to survive the next few hours in this stone labyrinth where past and present collided in violence and desperation. The battle raged through the ruins as day melted into evening shadows, growing long between the ancient walls. Tsela's arrival had evened the odds, but not eliminated the danger. Holt's men were professional killers who used the complex architecture to their advantage, turning carved chambers into sniper nests and narrow passages into deadly ambush points. Mara found herself separated from the children during a particularly intense firefight, forced to take shelter in what had once been a ceremonial chamber. Petroglyphs covered the walls, ancient symbols that seemed to watch the modern violence with timeless patience. She pressed herself against stone that had been carved by hands that never knew gunpowder or greed, and tried to orient herself in the three-dimensional maze. The ruins' layout was deliberately confusing to outsiders with false passages and dead ends designed to trap invaders. But it also meant that defenders could become lost, just as easily cut off from allies, and picked off one by enemies who'd mapped the structure during the initial assault. A boot scraped on stone nearby, and Mara froze. Someone was moving through the chamber next to hers, their breathing careful and controlled. She eased around a corner, rifle ready, and found herself face to face with one of Holt's men, a scarred killer whose eyes held no mercy. They fired simultaneously. His bullet struck the wall inches from her head, filling the air with stone chips. Hers took him center mass, dropping him with a gurgling cry that echoed off the carved walls. But the sound of gunfire had given away her position. Boots pounded on stone as other attackers converged on her location, and Mara realized she was about to be trapped in the very chamber where she'd sought shelter. That's when she heard it, Elsa's voice calling instructions that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The water channel, follow the water channel toward the moon. Mara looked around desperately and spotted what Elsa meant a narrow groove carved into the chamber floor, barely visible in the dying light. It led toward a section of wall that looked solid, but upon closer inspection revealed a hidden opening just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. She dove into the passage just as bullets began ricocheting off the walls behind her. The ancient water channel led through darkness that was absolute, forcing her to navigate by touch alone. Her hands found carved handhold steps cut into living rock, evidence of engineering that had survived centuries while empires rose and fell. The passage opened into a larger chamber where filtered moonlight revealed an astonishing sight. Elsa, Finn, Faye, and Wren huddled together in what appeared to be the ruins' original sanctuary. Dr. Martinez knelt beside them, her medical bag open, as she tended to a graze on Finn's arm. "How did you?" Mara began. "Mother brought us here once." Elsa explained, her voice thick with memory. "Before everything went wrong, when we were still a family. She showed us the hidden passages, said the old ones had built this place to protect children from the kind of monsters that walk in daylight. The sanctuary was remarkable. A natural cave expanded and refined by Anasazi architects, with fresh water seeping from the walls and air circulation that kept the space comfortable despite being buried deep in stone. Ancient artwork covered every surface, depicting scenes of daily life, seasonal ceremonies, and protective spirits that watched over the people. But their refuge was discovered moments later as Tom Standing Bear appeared through another hidden entrance, blood trickling from a scalp wound, but his eyes bright with fierce satisfaction. "Holt's down to 3 men," he reported. "Tsela has them pinned in the upper chambers, but they've got enough ammunition to hold out until dawn." And then what? Dr. Martinez asked. Then more of Holt's people arrive. He sent word before the attack if he doesn't check in by morning, his entire organization converges on these ruins. 50 men, maybe more. The implications were stark. They'd won the immediate battle but faced annihilation if they couldn't end this conflict before reinforcements arrived. And Holt himself was still alive, still dangerous, still desperate to reclaim the evidence that could destroy him. Elsa pulled out the photograph again, studying it in the moonlight that filtered through the sanctuary's ceiling. "There has to be more," she said. Mother was too smart to put all her evidence in one place. This photograph proves the conspiracy. But where are the documents? The witness statements, the financial records that show who paid for the massacre. Mara examined the locket's brass key more carefully, noting details she'd missed before. It wasn't just a safety deposit box key, it was specifically designed for the Territorial Bank of Carson City, with a number etched so small it was barely visible. 237. Box 237, she murmured. Everything your mother collected must be there. But Carson City might as well be on the moon if we can't get past Holt's men. Maybe we don't have to get past them, Elsa said quietly. Maybe we can make them come to us on our terms. She outlined a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal depending on your perspective. The sanctuary connected to multiple passages throughout the ruins, allowing them to move unseen while their enemies remained trapped in known positions. If they could lure Holt into the deeper chambers away from his remaining men, it's too dangerous, Mara protested. He'll kill you the moment he gets close enough. He needs the locket intact, Elsa countered. And he needs to know if there are copies of that photograph hidden elsewhere. That gives us leverage, at least temporarily. Tom Standing Bear nodded slowly. The girl speaks wisdom. Sometimes the only way to kill a snake is to let it think it's about to feed. As they prepared for what might be their final gambit, explosions began echoing from the upper levels. Holt had found dynamite among his men's equipment and was using it to collapse passages, sealing off escape routes, while blasting new paths toward their hiding place. The ancient sanctuary shook with each detonation, dust raining from carved ceilings that had stood for 1,000 years. The ruins that had sheltered them were becoming their tomb, and outside dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Time was running out for the living and the dead alike. The explosions grew closer, each blast sending tremors through the stone that made the ancient architecture groan with stress it was never designed to bear. Holt was systematically destroying the upper levels of the ruins' collapsing passages and chambers in his desperate attempt to reach the sanctuary where his quarry had taken refuge. He's going to bring the whole structure down. Dr. Martinez observed her medical training, allowing her to assess structural damage with clinical precision. These walls have survived centuries, but they weren't built to withstand modern explosives. Tom Standing Bear pressed his ear to the stone wall, listening to sounds that carried through the rock itself. 3 men still with him, moving systematic-like, checking each chamber before they blow it. Smart bastards learning the layout as he destroys it. Elsa clutched the locket so tightly her knuckles had gone white. We have to try the plan now, before the passages become impassable. Mara wanted to refuse to find some other way that didn't involve using a 14-year-old girl as bait for the most dangerous man in the Nevada territory. But another explosion closer this time reminded her that they were rapidly running out of options. "I'll be watching from the prayer chamber," she said finally. "The moment he makes a move against you, you take the shot." Elsa finished. "I understand." They moved through the water channel with desperate urgency, the sound of approaching destruction covering any noise they made. The passage system was a marvel of ancient engineering, allowing them to traverse the entire ruin complex without exposing themselves to enemy fire. But it also meant they were committed to their course. Once Elsa revealed herself to Holt, there would be no retreat, no second chances. The plan was elegantly simple. Elsa would appear in the main plaza, claiming she wanted to negotiate for her siblings' lives. She'd offered to trade the locket for safe passage, drawing Holt into a position where Mara could get a clear shot from the concealed prayer chamber. Meanwhile, Tom Standing Bear and Dr. Martinez would circle around through the upper passages, cutting off Holt's escape routes. But as Elsa emerged into the moonlit plaza, rifle in hand and locket gleaming against her chest, the confrontation took an unexpected turn. "Hello, Father." She called out, her young voice carrying clearly in the confined space. Holt appeared at the top of a carved stairway, his black coat torn and his pale eyes wild with fury and exhaustion. The silver-handled revolver gleamed in his hand, but he didn't immediately raise it toward his daughter. "So you finally understand," he said, his cultured voice hoarse from shouting orders and breathing stone dust. "Your mother poisoned you against me, filled your head with lies about duty and conscience. But blood tells, doesn't it? Look at you standing there with a rifle ready to kill or be killed. You're more my child than hers." "I'm nothing like you," Elsa replied, but Mara could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Aren't you? You've kept your siblings alive for 8 months through cunning and ruthlessness. You've killed men who threatened your family. You're negotiating from a position of strength, even though you're outgunned and surrounded." Holt descended the stairs slowly, his revolver still lowered. "Those are my gifts to you, not your mother's." She was weak sentimental. She let emotions override practical necessity. From her hidden position, Mara had a clear shot at Holt's center mass. But something in the conversation made her hesitate. Elsa was learning something about herself, something important, and interrupting now might rob her of crucial understanding about who she really was. "Mother died protecting us," Elsa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your mother died because she couldn't accept that sometimes good people must do terrible things for the greater benefit." The Belmont mine was sitting on enough silver to fund schools, hospitals, infrastructure that would benefit thousands of people. But it was trapped under land, claimed by a few dozen savages who contributed nothing to civilization's advancement. Holt was only 20 feet away, now close enough that Mara could see the fanatical conviction burning in his pale eyes. "I gave them a choice: relocate peacefully and receive generous compensation, or continue squatting on valuable resources that belong to the territory as a whole. They chose poorly." "You murdered children," Elsa whispered. "I cleared an obstacle to progress. And when bleeding hearts like your mother threatened to expose necessary actions as atrocities, I cleared those obstacles too." He raised his revolver, but not toward Elsa, toward the hidden prayer chamber, where he somehow knew Mara was concealed. "Just as I'm clearing this obstacle now." The shot was impossibly fast, impossibly accurate. Holt's bullet struck the carved wall inches from Mara's head, sending stone fragments into her eyes and forcing her to duck away from her rifle's scope. In that instant of blindness and confusion, she heard the sound that chilled her blood, Elsa's scream of pain. When Mara's vision cleared, she saw Holt holding his daughter by the throat, his revolver pressed against her temple. Blood seeped from a gash on Elsa's forehead, where he'd struck her with the gun barrel, but her gray eyes still blazed with defiance. "The locket," Holt demanded. "And the photograph. Everything your mother hid, everything she stole from me. It's not yours." Elsa gasped through his choking grip. "It never was yours. It belongs to the families you destroyed, the people you murdered." Holt's grip tightened, and Elsa's face began to turn purple. "Your mother said the same thing, right before I put a bullet through her sanctimonious heart." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Lillian Veyron hadn't died in some distant place, killed by unknown enemies. She'd been murdered by her own husband, executed for the crime of trying to expose his atrocities. But the confession also revealed something else: Holt's absolute desperation. He was no longer thinking tactically, no longer calculating odds and benefits. He was operating on pure rage. and that made him vulnerable to mistakes. Elsa seemed to realize the same thing. Instead of struggling against his grip, she went limp, letting her full weight hang from his choking hand. The unexpected shift in balance forced Holt to adjust his stance, moving his gun hand away from her head for just an instant. It was enough. Mara's rifle spoke from the prayer chamber, the bullet taking Holt high in the shoulder and spinning him around. He released Elsa, who dropped to the stone floor gasping for air, and tried to bring his revolver back on target despite the damage to his gun arm. But Tom Standing Bear had reached the plaza through the upper passages, his own rifle trained on the wounded outlaw. "For my sister," he said simply. "For my nephew. For all the children you buried in that mine." Holt's laugh was the sound of madness given voice. "Kill me, and you solve nothing. I'm just one man, one cog in a machine that stretches from here to Washington. The people who really planned Belmont, who really profit from it, they'll never face justice. Maybe not," Elsa said, struggling to her feet with the locket still clutched in her hands. "But at least we can make sure everyone knows their names." She held up the photograph, its damning evidence clearly visible in the moonlight. Governor Richardson, Federal Marshal Crawford, Territorial Mining Commissioner Davis. All of them standing over a mass grave, all of them smiling while children's bodies were thrown into the dirt. Holt's pale eyes filled with something that might have been respect. "You really are my daughter. Ruthless enough to destroy men's lives for the sake of abstract justice. I'm nothing like you," Elsa repeated, but this time her voice carried absolute conviction. "You killed for profit. I'm willing to die for truth." The standoff stretched through heartbeats that felt like hours. 3 rifles trained on one wounded man, justice balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. But it was the sound of approaching hoofbeats that finally broke the tension, dozens of riders moving fast through the canyon toward the ruins. "My men," Holt said with satisfaction. "Right on schedule." Tom Standing Bear's expression remained grim, but unsurprised. "Then we finish this now before they arrive." But as he began to squeeze his trigger, another voice called out from the darkness beyond the plaza. A familiar voice that made everyone freeze in recognition. "Nobody moves, Federal Marshal's office." Tsela emerged from the shadows, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came a group of men wearing the distinctive badges of federal law enforcement, their rifles covering everyone in the plaza with professional competence. The leading marshal stepped forward, his weathered face grim with purpose. "Gideon Holt, you're under arrest for the murders at Belmont Mine and conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and about 15 other charges that'll take me all night to read." Holt's composure finally cracked completely. "You can't arrest me. I have protection. I have guarantees." "Had," the marshal corrected. "Past tense. Turns out Governor Richardson and his friends decided you'd become more of a liability than an asset. Something about being too visible, too reckless. They sent us to clean up their mess." The truth was even more devastating than Elsa could have imagined. Holt hadn't just been abandoned by his co-conspirators. He'd been deliberately betrayed, set up to take the blame for crimes that reached far beyond one man's brutality. But as the marshals moved to take Holt into custody, he made one final desperate play. His injured arm suddenly proved less damaged than he'd pretended, his revolver snapping up toward Elsa with murderous intent. "If I hang, she hangs with me." 3 rifles fired simultaneously. Tom Standing Bear's bullet took Holt's center mass. Mara's struck him in the head, and Tsela's fired from barely 10 feet away nearly tore him in half. Gideon Holt, the monster who terrorized the Nevada territory for 3 years, died in the ancient plaza, where countless generations had lived and loved and passed into history. His blood soaked into stone that had seen violence before and would see it again, but rarely for such a worthy cause. As the gun smoke cleared and the echoes faded, Elsa knelt beside her father's body with an expression that was impossible to read. She reached out slowly, as if to touch his face, then stopped herself. "I'm sorry you couldn't be the man Mother wanted you to be." she whispered. I'm sorry we couldn't save you from yourself. The marshals moved efficiently to secure the scene and tend to the wounded. Dr. Martinez emerged from her hiding place to treat injuries her medical supplies depleted, but her skill as vital as ever. The children Finn, Fay, and little Wren were found safe in the deepest chambers of the ruins, protected by Tom Standing Bear's warriors, who'd formed a defensive perimeter around their refuge. But it was the conversation between Elsa and the lead marshal that finally revealed the full scope of what they'd accomplished. The photograph in the locket was indeed damning evidence of high-level corruption, but it was only the beginning. Your mother was smarter than anyone gave her credit for, Marshal Thompson explained as dawn broke over the ancient ruins. She didn't just collect evidence, she distributed it. Copies of everything hidden in safety deposit boxes in 3 different cities, all with instructions to be opened if anything happened to her or her children. The key that Elsa had guarded so desperately was just one of several each, unlocking a cache of documents that would bring down the entire network of corruption that had made the Belmont Mine massacre possible. Governor Richardson's already fled the territory. Thompson continued. Marshal Crawford ate his gun rather than face trial. The mining company's assets are being seized to pay compensation to the victims' families. Justice, it seemed, would finally be served. But as Mara looked around at the cost of that justice, the destroyed settlement of Esperanza, the lives lost in the siege, the ancient ruins damaged by modern explosives, she wondered if any victory was worth such a price. Elsa seemed to read her thoughts. Mother always said the truth has its own weight, the girl said quietly. Heavy enough to crush lies, but heavy enough to crush the people carrying it too. As they prepared to leave the ruins for the last time, Mara noticed something that made her pause. In the prayer chamber, where she'd hidden during the final confrontation, new artwork had appeared on the walls. Not carved into the stone like the ancient petroglyphs, but sketched in charcoal by someone with remarkable artistic skill. The images depicted the recent battle warriors fighting in defense of children, marshals arriving with justice, and a figure that could only be Lillian Viron watching over everything with protective eyes. At the bottom, in careful lettering, someone had written, "The old ones remember, the new ones learn. The truth endures." It was signed with Elsa's initials and dated with the present day. The girl had found a way to add their story to the ancient chronicle of human struggle preserved in these walls, ensuring that future generations would know what had transpired here. The truth would indeed endure, carved in stone and written in hearts that had learned the terrible cost of justice. And in the years to come, when other travelers sought shelter in these ruins, they would find not just empty chambers, but a living testament to the courage required to stand against darkness, no matter what form it takes. The journey back to what remained of Esperanza took 3 days, the group traveling slowly to accommodate the wounded and the exhausted children. Federal marshals provided security, but the landscape itself seemed to have changed in the aftermath of the confrontation. Word of Holt's death had spread faster than wildfire, and the criminal network he'd commanded was already collapsing as former allies distanced themselves from his tainted legacy. Dr. Martinez rode beside the wagon that carried little Wren, the girl's recovery progressing steadily under expert medical care. The fever had broken completely, and her appetite was returning with encouraging regularity. But it was the change in her siblings that truly marked their transformation from hunted fugitives to free children with a future. Finn and Fay laughed together for the first time in months, their voices carrying across the desert like music that had been too long silenced. They asked questions about everything they saw: desert flowers, cloud formations, the habits of prairie dogs, with the insatiable curiosity of children who were finally safe enough to wonder about the world beyond immediate survival. Elsa remained more subdued, but Mara recognized the contemplative quiet of someone processing traumatic experiences rather than the hollow silence of despair. The girl carried the locket openly now, its chain glinting in the desert sun like a badge of honor rather than a burden of secrets. "Oh," "What will you do now?" Mara asked as they made camp on the second night, the ruins of their recent battle visible as a distant shadow against the star-scattered sky. Mother left instructions. Elsa replied, her voice steady despite the weight of decisions no 14-year-old should have to make. If something happened to her, we were supposed to go to San Francisco. She has had a sister there, Aunt Catherine. She runs a school for orphaned children. That sounds like a good place for a fresh start. Elsa nodded, but her gray eyes remained troubled. The marshals say there'll be a trial. People who worked with Holt government officials who took bribes, mining company executives who knew about the massacre. They want me to testify. The prospect clearly terrified her, not from fear of legal proceedings, but from the knowledge that standing up in court would mean reliving every detail of the nightmare they'd just escaped. "You don't have to decide tonight," Mara said gently. "Or tomorrow, or even next week. Some choices can wait until you're ready to make them." Mother never got to make that choice. She died before she could see justice served. Your mother served justice every day she kept you children safe. She served it when she gathered evidence against impossible odds. She served it when she chose her family's safety over her own. Mara stirred the campfire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up toward the infinite stars. Sometimes justice is about standing in court and pointing at guilty men. But sometimes it's about surviving long enough to become the kind of person who makes the world a little bit better. Elsa considered this for a long moment. "What kind of person do you think I'll become?" It was a question that deserved careful consideration. Mara studied the girl's face in the firelight and the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence that burned in her eyes, the way she instinctively positioned herself between potential threats and her younger siblings. "I think you'll become the kind of person your mother hoped you'd be when she first held you as a baby. Strong enough to protect the innocent, wise enough to know when mercy serves better than vengeance, and brave enough to stand for truth even when it costs you everything. Like you did, when you decided to help us instead of turning us away." Mara felt something twist in her chest, a pain that was also somehow a release. For the first time in years, she found herself thinking about her own daughter Emma, without the crushing weight of guilt and self-recrimination that usually accompanied such memories. "I helped you because I failed someone else," she admitted quietly. "A long time ago, when I was too frightened to act, too paralyzed by the possibility of making things worse. Emma died because I hesitated when courage was required." What happened? The story came slowly, painfully, like drawing poison from an infected wound. Emma had been 7 years old when raiders attacked their settlement, professional killers hired by the same territorial officials who'd later orchestrate the Belmont Mine massacre. Mara had had a clear shot at the raider leader could have ended the attack before it truly began. But she'd hesitated, worried about hitting innocent bystanders, paralyzed by the fear of taking a human life. By the time she'd finally pulled the trigger, it was too late. Emma had taken a bullet meant for another child dying in her mother's arms while the raiders escaped into the desert. "I spent 3 years believing that I was a coward," Mara finished. "That my daughter died because I wasn't brave enough to do what needed doing. And now?" Mara looked around at the sleeping forms of Fin Fei and Ren and their peaceful expressions, testimony to the safety they'd finally found. "Now I think maybe Emma died because evil men made evil choices. And maybe the reason I survived was so I could be here when you needed someone to make a different choice." Elsa reached across the fire and squeezed Mara's hand. "She would be proud of you. You're Emma. She'd be proud of who you chose to become." The words hit harder than any bullet, bringing tears that Mara had held back for years. But they were clean tears, washing away guilt that had poisoned too many days and nights. For the first time since Emma's death, she felt something that might eventually grow into peace. They reached Esperanza's ruins on the third day to find the settlement already stirring with new life. The adobe buildings could be repaired, the wells cleared, the plaza rebuilt stronger than before. And the people who'd called this place home were determined to continue calling it home, regardless of what Gideon Holt had tried to destroy. Tsela met them at the canyon entrance. His weathered face creased with something that might have been satisfaction. "The territorial governor has ordered all charges against Esperanza residents dropped," he reported. Something about wanting to avoid further embarrassment to his administration and Holt's remaining men, scattered to the four winds. Turns out they were more loyal to his money than his memory. The reunion was bittersweet. Friends embraced, grateful to see each other alive, but the cost of their victory was visible in bandaged wounds and faces marked by loss. Samuel Chen had died protecting Dr. Martinez, his sacrifice ensuring that medical care remained available during the siege. Maria Santos had lost her husband to sniper fire, but her two young sons had survived unharmed. Yet there was hope in the grief, determination in the mourning. These people had faced the worst that men like Holt could inflict, and had emerged not just alive, but united. The diversity that had once been Esperanza's vulnerability, different cultures, different languages, different traditions, had become its greatest strength when survival demanded cooperation. Dr. Martinez immediately resumed her medical practice, treating injuries with supplies donated by the federal marshals. But she also announced plans to expand her work, establishing a school that would teach not just reading and writing, but the technical skills needed to build a more prosperous future for the settlement. "We'll need teachers," she told Mara as they watched the children play in the partially rebuilt plaza. "People who understand that education is about more than memorizing facts. People who can help children grow into the kind of adults who make wise choices." The offer was tempting, a chance to start over in a place where her past would be honored rather than hidden, where her hard-won wisdom could serve a purpose larger than personal survival. But Mara's immediate concern was ensuring that Elsa and her siblings reached their aunt safely. "After San Francisco," she said. "After the children are settled with their family." "The offer will remain open," Dr. Martinez replied with understanding. "As long as you need it to." Tom Standing Bear had already begun the process of reclaiming traditional Ute lands that had been illegally seized for mining operations. The federal government, desperate to distance itself from the corruption exposed by Lillian Veyron's evidence, was proving surprisingly cooperative in restoring proper ownership. "My sister's children will grow up on the land where our ancestors are buried," he told Mara with quiet satisfaction. "Not in some barren reservation where the government thought they could forget about us." The healing would take time, years, perhaps generations, but it had finally begun. Truth had indeed proved to have its own weight, heavy enough to crush lies that had seemed impregnable just days before. As they prepared for the final leg of their journey to the railroad depot in Carson City, Elsa made a decision that surprised everyone. She asked Tom Standing Bear to teach her the traditional Ute words for justice, truth, and remembrance, then carefully carved them into the locket's surface alongside her mother's initials. "So the old ones and the new ones will understand each other." She explained, her artistic skill evident in the precise lettering. So the truth can be read in any language. The locket had become more than evidence or inheritance. It was a bridge between past and future. A promise that the sacrifices made in these desert canyons would not be forgotten by the generations who inherited their legacy. As the wagon carrying the children disappeared into the desert haze, heading toward a railroad that would carry them to new lives in California, Mara felt the particular sadness that comes with endings that are also beginnings. She would miss them terribly, but she knew they no longer needed her protection. Elsa had become the person her mother had died hoping she could be. The others would follow her example, growing into adults who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly despite it. And in the years to come, when travelers asked about the events that had shaken the Nevada territory in the late 1880s, the people of Esperanza would tell them a story. not just about outlaws and corruption, but about children who'd refused to let evil triumph simply because it wore expensive clothes and spoke with cultured voices. They would tell about a woman named Mara Colton, who'd chosen redemption over guilt, a Navajo scout named Tsela, who'd honored his daughter's memory through justice rather than revenge, and a doctor named Elena Martinez, who'd proved that healing could be about more than treating physical wounds. But mostly they would tell about 4 children who'd carried their mother's truth across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, protecting it with their lives, until it could finally shine light into the darkest corners of human greed and corruption. The truth had endured just as truth always does. Heavy enough to crush lies, strong enough to build better futures, and bright enough to guide the way for anyone brave enough to follow where it leads. In the end, that was Lillian Veyron's greatest legacy, not the evidence she'd gathered or the justice she'd made possible, but the children she'd raised to understand that some things are worth any sacrifice to protect. Truth, justice, love. The courage to stand against darkness, no matter what form it takes. These were the gifts she'd given her children and threw them to the world. The railroad station in Carson City buzzed with the controlled chaos of a frontier town, at the intersection of progress and tradition. Steam locomotives hissed and clanked on iron rails that stretched toward California dreams, while freight wagons still hauled supplies to mining camps and settlements scattered across Nevada's unforgiving landscape. Mara stood on the platform beside Elsa, watching porters load the family's meager possessions onto the westbound train. The journey from Esperanza had taken 2 weeks, but it felt like emerging from one world into another, from a place where survival was measured in heartbeats to one where people could plan for futures beyond the next meal or the next sunrise. Aunt Catherine's telegram said she'll meet us in San Francisco, Elsa said, clutching a paper that had been read and reread until the ink was beginning to fade. She says the school has room for all of us, that we can stay as long as we need to. The prospect of reunion with family, real family blood relatives who'd choose love over obligation, had transformed the children in ways both subtle and profound. Wren's laughter came more easily now, her small hands no longer constantly reaching for the weapons that had been necessary tools of survival. Finn and Faye had begun planning impossible futures. Finn wanted to become a railroad engineer, while Faye dreamed of opening a bakery that would serve pastries to hungry travelers. But it was Elsa herself who changed most dramatically. The haunted wariness that had shadowed her gray eyes for months was finally giving way to something that looked almost like hope. She spoke of attending real school of learning subjects that had nothing to do with staying alive in hostile territory. "Will you visit?" she asked as the train whistle announced final boarding. Mara felt her throat tighten with emotion she hadn't expected. These children had become her family in ways that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. San Francisco's a long way from Nevada, not too long for someone who once crossed 300 miles of desert to keep 4 strangers safe. The truth of that statement hit Mara with unexpected force. She'd spent years believing that distance could protect her from the pain of caring about people. But these children had taught her that some connections transcend geography. Love once given freely doesn't recognize borders or boundaries. "I'll visit," she promised. "When things are settled here, when Esperanza is rebuilt properly, when the trials are finished. I'll come to San Francisco and you can show me this famous school your aunt runs." Elsa threw her arms around Mara in a fierce embrace that conveyed everything words couldn't express. Gratitude for protection offered when it was needed most. Admiration for courage displayed under impossible circumstances. Love that had grown from desperation into something clean and lasting. "Thank you," the girl whispered. "For everything. For choosing to help when you could have chosen safety. For seeing us as people worth protecting instead of problems to be solved." The other children joined the embrace, creating a knot of arms and affection that drew curious glances from other passengers. But Mara didn't care about appearances. For the first time in years, she felt complete, not because she'd found what she'd lost, but because she'd discovered what she'd never known she was looking for. As the train pulled away from the platform, Mara waved until the children's faces were lost in steam and distance. Then she stood alone on the platform, watching iron rails carry her chosen family toward futures she could only imagine and hope for. But solitude no longer felt like punishment. It felt like preparation for the work that still needed doing. The trials began 3 months later in the territorial courthouse, a building that had witnessed more corruption than justice during its brief existence. Federal prosecutors had assembled a case that reached from Nevada's territorial government to Washington, D.C., exposing a network of bribery and murder that shocked even frontier citizens accustomed to official misconduct. Mara testified about the siege at Esperanza and the events leading up to Holt's death. Dr. Martinez described the medical evidence of systematic atrocities committed at the Belmont mine. Tom Standing Bear spoke for the families destroyed by government policies designed to clear valuable land for corporate exploitation. But it was Elsa's testimony delivered by letter from San Francisco that proved most damaging to the remaining defendants. Her description of life on the run from her own father, combined with the physical evidence contained in Lillian Veyron's hidden caches, painted a picture of corruption so comprehensive that even the most cynical observers were horrified. Governor Richardson, captured while attempting to flee to Mexico, received a sentence of life imprisonment. Federal Marshal Crawford's suicide had denied justice the satisfaction of formal punishment, but his estate was seized to pay restitution to victims' families. The mining company executives who'd profited from the Belmont massacre found themselves facing both criminal prosecution and civil litigation that would strip them of every asset they'd accumulated through blood money. The trials became a sensation in newspapers across the American West, proof that even the most powerful officials could be held accountable for their crimes when citizens were brave enough to demand justice. Editorial writers called it a new chapter in frontier law, while political reformers used the cases to argue for stronger federal oversight of territorial governments. But for Mara, the most meaningful outcome was smaller and more personal: the establishment of the Mara Colton Memorial Fund, financed by recovered assets from Holt's criminal empire. The fund provided education and medical care for orphaned children throughout the Nevada territory, ensuring that no child would face the kind of desperate survival that had nearly destroyed Elsa and her siblings. Dr. Martinez had suggested the name, arguing that Emma's death had ultimately led to the exposure of the corruption that made such tragedies possible. She died because of their greed, the doctor had explained. Let her memory serve life instead of feeding more death. The fund's first beneficiaries were the children of Esperanza itself, the settlement having grown from a hidden refuge into a thriving community that welcomed anyone seeking honest work and peaceful coexistence. The diversity that had once made it vulnerable now made it strong, different traditions, combining to create something entirely new in the American West. Mara found her place in this new community as both teacher and guardian. The school Dr. Martinez had envisioned became reality, offering education that combined practical frontier skills with academic subjects that would prepare students for a changing world. But beyond formal lessons, Mara taught something more valuable: the understanding that courage was a choice available to anyone willing to act on conscience rather than convenience. Letters from San Francisco arrived regularly, filled with news of the 4 children who'd become her family through trial and choice. Wren was thriving in her aunt's school, her natural artistic talent nurtured by teachers who recognized genius disguised as childish drawings. Finn had indeed begun studying railroad engineering, his mechanical aptitude earning praise from instructors who'd initially been skeptical of his frontier background. Faye had discovered a talent for mathematics that promised a future in business or finance skills that would serve her well in a nation increasingly driven by commerce and industry. And Elsa had begun writing essays, poetry, and eventually a book about their experiences that would introduce thousands of readers to the reality behind the romantic myths of the American West. But it was Elsa's final letter that contained the most important news, arriving on a spring morning when desert flowers were blooming across the Nevada landscape. Dear Mara. The letter began in the careful handwriting that had once carved truth into ancient stone walls. I wanted you to be the first to know that I've decided to become a lawyer. Not because I want to prosecute criminals or make money from other people's troubles, but because I want to help people who don't have voices powerful enough to be heard above the noise of wealth and politics. Aunt Catherine says the law schools in California are beginning to accept women students, especially those who can demonstrate unusual commitment to justice. I think surviving everything we survived together should qualify as unusual commitment. I'm going to specialize in defending the rights of children and families who've been displaced by corporate greed or government corruption. I want to make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else, at least not without someone fighting back with legal weapons instead of rifles. The locket is being displayed in the California Historical Society, along with Mother's documents and the photograph that brought down so many powerful men. Visitors come every day to see it, and the museum staff tells them our story, not just the exciting parts about gunfights and chases, but the important parts about why people choose to fight for truth, even when fighting seems hopeless. I hope you know that you're part of that story and always will be. Not as the woman who rescued us, but as the person who taught us that rescue is something people do for each other when civilization fails and only love remains. Finn wants to build a railroad that connects Nevada to San Francisco so we can visit more often. Faye is already calculating how much such a project would cost and who might invest in it. Ren is drawing pictures of the train stations we'll build along the way. But I think about something different when I think about visiting Nevada. I think about sitting around a fire in Esperanza, listening to you tell stories about the old days when the territory was still wild and dangerous. I think about showing my own children, when I have them someday, the ruins where their mother learned that courage isn't something you're born with, but something you choose to practice until it becomes who you are. The ancient ones had the right idea when they built those ruins. They knew that some places become sacred, not because of what happens there, but because of what people choose to become there. Thank you for helping us become the people Mother hoped we could be. Thank you for choosing to become the person Emma would be proud to call her mother. With all our love and gratitude, Elsa, Finn, Faye, and Ren. Mara read the letter 3 times before the tears obscured the words completely. But they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that wash away old wounds and make room for new growth. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the wooden box where she kept her most precious possessions. Emma's baby shoes, a photograph of her husband taken before the frontier, hardened his gentle nature into something cruel. And now this testament to the truth that love doesn't end with death, but transforms into something larger and more enduring. Outside her window, children were playing in Esperanza's rebuilt plaza, their laughter echoing off adobe walls that had been strengthened by adversity and united by shared purpose. Among them were some of the first beneficiaries of the Mara Colton Memorial Fund Ute and Navajo children, learning alongside the sons and daughters of Mexican farmers and Chinese merchants, creating friendships that would shape the future of the American West. Dr. Martinez emerged from the school building, her medical bag in one hand and a stack of student essays in the other. She waved to Mara with the warm familiarity of someone who'd become both colleague and close friend, through shared trials and common purpose. Tsela rode through the settlement on his regular patrol, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of a man who'd lived to see justice served and his people's rights restored. He touched his hat brim in respectful greeting, a gesture that acknowledged everything they'd endured together without need for words. Tom Standing Bear was supervising the construction of new houses for Ute families returning to their ancestral lands, the sound of hammers and saws creating a rhythm of hope that carried across the desert. His sister's children were indeed growing up on the land where their ancestors were buried, fulfilling the promise he'd made over their graves. These were the real fruits of their victory. not the headlines or the legal precedents, but the simple fact that children could play safely while their parents planned for futures measured in years rather than days. Truth had indeed proved heavy enough to crush lies and strong enough to build something better in their place. As evening approached and the desert sun painted the canyon walls the color of old gold, Mara walked to the overlook, where Samuel Chen had been buried with honors befitting a man who'd found courage in his final moments. His grave marker bore an inscription in both English and Chinese. He chose family over fear. It was a choice they'd all made in their own ways and their own time. Mara had chosen to protect 4 strangers rather than preserve her own safety. Dr. Martinez had chosen healing over revenge. Tom Standing Bear had chosen justice over vengeance. Tsela had chosen service over bitterness, and 4 children had chosen love over hate, hope over despair, truth over the comfortable lies that might have made their survival easier but their lives meaningless. The locket that had started it all now rested in a museum case, its golden surface reflecting light onto the faces of visitors who came to learn about courage and sacrifice and the price of standing against darkness. But its real legacy lived in the hearts and minds of people who'd been changed by proximity to truth, who discovered that ordinary individuals could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose principle over convenience. As stars began to appear in the deepening sky, Mara allowed herself to imagine a future where Elsa's railroad connected Nevada to California, where children traveled safely between communities that had learned the value of cooperation over competition. She pictured Wren's artwork hanging in galleries, Finn's trains carrying supplies to settlements built on justice rather than exploitation, Faye's businesses creating prosperity that lifted everyone rather than enriching a few at the expense of many. It was a good future to imagine and worth working toward, not because it was guaranteed, but because it was possible. And possibility was all that hope required to transform dreams into reality. The ancient ones who'd built the ruins where their battle had reached its climax had understood this truth. They'd carved their dreams into living stone, creating something that would endure long after their individual lives had ended. Now new dreamers were building new structures, less permanent perhaps, but no less meaningful foundations for a civilization that might finally learn to value truth above profit and justice above convenience. The locket's curse had become its blessing. What had begun as evidence of corruption had transformed into proof that courage was contagious, that standing for truth could inspire others to make similar stands, that individual actions could ripple outward through time and space to touch lives not yet born. Mara Colton, gunsmith turned teacher widow turned guardian, had found her way home at last. Not to a place, but to a purpose larger than her own pain and more enduring than her own mortality. In the distance, a coyote howled its ancient song to the rising moon, a sound that had echoed through these canyons long before human beings arrived and would continue long after they were gone. But tonight, it sounded like music, rather than mourning, a celebration of survival and renewal that connected past to future in an unbroken chain of hope. The truth had endured, as truth always does. And tomorrow there would be new truths to discover, new battles to fight, new children to protect and teach and love. The work continued. The hope endured. The legacy lived on. In the end, that was enough.